The secret to navigating the Great Cherrick Boar is to let it whirl you twice around its edge and then fire you out upon the calmer seas. The Blood Sea of Istar was created when the gods threw down Istar due to the arrogance of the priest king. The Wall of the North guards the realms of men against the winter that the others bring. But how do you create such geographical landmarks? How do you create such landscapes that draw your readers into your world and transport them to the fantasy realm? Hello, fellow world builders, and welcome to another episode of Just in Time Worlds. Today, I want to discuss geographical features of a fantasy world. I'm going to break today's discussion down into places of power, landmarks and defenses, signs of the times before, and finally I will discuss how to build a memorable geographical feature. Okay, before we get going, please do hit the subscribe button. It really does help the channel grow. Let's get cracking. Places of power. So what I mean by places of power is it's part of the world where people go to in order to either gather power or give power or get elements of power. Now, this doesn't have to be magical power. It could be a place of mystical significance. In our world, examples of this is Mecca for Muslims or Jerusalem for Christians. These are places where people go for a religious pilgrimage. And it could be the same in your world. It could be a place where a god was born or where a prophet was born. And people go there out of religious devotion and to experience the mysticism of the place. But it could also be a place of magical significance. Maybe you have a central wellspring of magic from which all the power in your world flows. And that is a place of power. Or maybe it's a place where you get a certain plant or a certain animal that is used in your magic. A fantastical or magical fauna or flora, as I discussed in my video on fauna and flora. Or maybe it's a place where people mine a magical ore or an anti-magical ore. Stephen Erickson uses this very well in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, where you have the Ototarl mines. And in fact, when we were creating our live action roleplay world, the Tales of Tiana, we took a inspiration from his Ototarl and we created an ore that was an anti-magic ore, which was mined in a specific place in the Red Citadel. And if you're interested in reading more about how we did it, there's a link to the World Anvil site in the description. There's also places of power that can be created places of power. So Mercedes Lackey does this very well with her veils and Hearthstone. So how she does it is the Hawk brothers, who are a people within her world, they gather ley lines. So her magic system is based on ley lines and nodes. Magic flows through the land and naturally forms nodes. But what the Hawk brothers do is they actually gather those nodes into a central place of their convenience and create what they call a Hearthstone. The Hearthstone then powers the Vale, which is where they live, and this then becomes this fantastical place where they have hot pools and they have the weather is controlled, so it's never unpleasant inside the Vale, and they grow these amazing plants that have got no business existing in the environment where they're living in, because it's basically like a hothouse environment inside the Vale. But because of their proximity to the Hearthstone, all Hawk brothers have this bleached look. Their hair is bleached white, their skin is bleached white, and their eyes turn blue because the magic literally leaches the color out of them. So the this place of power where they live has an influence on them as a people. So this is a great example of a created place of power. And it's also an example of a defensive place, because the mages who live in the Vales can use the power of the Heartstone to defend. Now, you don't have to turn to magical features in order to have a defensive landmark. One of the descriptions that stays with me through all the years is a description from Raymond Feist, where he says that this pass could be held by 6 grannies wielding brooms. And it's the pass to one of the abbeys in his world. That's a strong and defensible location. A master of using geographical landscapes in order to make a defensive bulwark is George R.R. Martin and his Wall of the North that was built by Brandon the Builder. The reason why that wall stands out so much is because we know that it is both a magical defense and a physical defense. And we know by its very presence that whatever is on the other side of the wall must be terrible. It must be a horrifying thing that requires a wall that is 700 feet high and includes magical defenses in a world where magic is not common and where it requires a terrible, terrible price. So that's a really great example of building a landmark and a natural defense, a landmark and a magical defense against as a fantasy element of your world. I referenced the Cherrick Boar in my opening sequence, and David Eddings used the Cherrick Boar very well as a rite of passage for Garion when he stands there and the ship goes twice around the whirlpool and then gets thrown out into the calmer seas. So you can also have elements that are natural but that form a defensive landmark. Other great examples of natural landmarks include memorable mountains or memorable lakes. Tamora Pierce, who is a children's fantasy author, in her book The Lioness Rampart, her heroine goes to the roof of the world where she battles her way up a mountain to claim the Dominion Jewel. And it is such a memorable story because her battle against the elements on this mountain and her journey to the roof of the world itself makes the story stand out in your mind due to this mountain which takes on a life of its own. So it's a natural landmark, but it has magical elements to it. Then you can also use geographical features as signs of the time before. Now, Mercedes Lackey is an absolute master of this. In the far past of her world, there were 2 mages, Uthro and Mar, and they had a massive war that ended in them destroying each other effectively. And their 2 towers, their 2 center points, sent out shock waves of magic across the world, and where they intersected, there were terrible events that happened as these 2 waves crashed into each other, kind of like a natural disaster but using magic instead of water. This created things like the Pelagros Forest, where there are all of these weird fauna and flora, and it created things like Lake Evendom, which is the sunken lake where Mara's lived, and it created the Glass Plains, which is where Uthro's tower stood, which is actually guarded by the Hawk brothers. And it gives you this sense of history, of the things that have gone before, that have created this world, that have made it into what it is today. Steven Erikson with the Malazan, the Malazan books, does amazing work in this area. So The Otataral Island, I won't spoil around it, but the Otataral Island was created by events that happened in the First Empire, which was set millennia before the events described in the Book of the Fallen. I highly recommend that as a series, by the way. Steven Erikson's Book of the Fallen. Fantastic world building. Prince of Thorns by Mark Lawrence also does this in its post-apocalyptic setup. There are references to the builders and what they left behind and tar roads, and you very quickly realize that it is in fact set in a post-apocalyptic Europe, which of course gives it the additional feeling of these fantastical elements that were actually things that we know in this post-apocalyptic world. So most often, when you're using fantastical elements as a signs of the time before, what it is these landmarks are buildings or places that were caused by events in the past. They are relics of some apocalypse of the past. So in summary, how do you actually build geographical features? So first you should ask yourself, what does it look like to the normal senses? When you look at it with your eyes, when you touch it, when you hear it, what does it look like, feel like, smell like? What does it look like to the mage? If a mage looks at it, do they see something else than what the normal person sees? Do they see a deeper magic? Do they see an additional layer of reality? What is the difference to the magical senses versus the mundane senses? How did it come to be that way? What is the history of this place? Was it involved in an apocalypse? Was it abandoned? Was it a place where a god was born? Then, what is it called? And the reason why that is my fourth question is because naming places is hard. Naming anything is hard, but naming places is hard. And if you've already answered, what does it look like? What does it look like to the mage? And what is its history? That can help you in making a name that is memorable and makes sense. And the reason why that's important is because your name really is going to be what people remember. So you can go with a descriptive name like The Wall, and everybody knows what that is. Or you can name it for a people, like the Cherek Boar is named for the people, the Chereks, who are seafarers. Or you can name it as in a sense of natural evolution of language. So an example of this was in the LARPing world, the Tale of Tiana, we had a bay, a sea bay, that looked kind of like a sack. It looked on the map, it was a kind of sack area like this. And the culture that we had that lived close to it were the Hoblings, who were based roughly on a kind of French culture. So I took the French word for sea and sack, and then I said, okay, over the centuries, those have combined into one word. And that was why I named it the Bay of Maresco. Mare for sea, sack for sack, and then you combine it over the centuries into one word. So you need to think of a name that works with what it looks like to the mage, and where it comes from. And then you can come up with a name more easily and one that's more memorable. Okay, some more questions. Does it have an ongoing effect on the world? Does it cause something to happen? Is it like the wall that's a defensive bulwark? You know, is it something that continuously affects what the natural world around it? Like the Vales are these magical places. What is its impact on the world? Does it have any special significance to the world that would cause pilgrims to travel there? People to seek it out? And what effect does that have on the people who live there and the environment around it? You know, is it constantly surrounded by a little army of tents of pilgrims who come to visit this place? How does it interact with magic? Does it need to be maintained continuously, like the veil needs its heartstone in order to remain a place? Or maybe it gives off power, maybe it's a wellspring of power. Or maybe it's an element that feeds into the magic, or an ore that is an anti-magic. So how does it interact with the magic of your world? And that is how you build a fantasy landmark and geographical landscape for your fantasy world. I hope that you have enjoyed this video, and I will see you on Tuesday for another episode of Just in Time Worlds. Please do hit the thumbs up button.